Well, we've certainly had a lot of fun with this one, the latest poll from Léger, which showed many, many interesting things. Of course, a big jump in support for the Liberals if Denis Coderre was their leader. If the party was led by the former mayor of Montreal, Liberals would obtain 21% of the vote. Compare that to where they're faring with interim leader Marc Tanguay, only get around 15%. Same Léger poll shows the Parti Québécois is still sitting in first place, but a lot of voters for the PQ not so keen on sovereignty. With more on this, let's go to Christian Bourque, Executive Vice President of Léger. Christian, welcome back to the program.
My pleasure to be here.
So let me ask you, you guys do polls all the time. Are there any times where you see the results of a poll and you go, oh, this is going to be a good one when we release it? How would you describe what you were thinking about this poll just before you released it yesterday?
Yeah, well, the last 6 months have been a lot of fun because finally we're seeing something happening in the data after 5 years of the CAQ being sort of alone at the top. So it has been an exciting while. Now, this is the first time that we are actually measuring Denis Coderre as part of this survey. We wanted to figure out, does he still have any pull in politics? And what is interesting when you mention that the Liberals would do better if Mr. Coderre was there is that the vote he is getting is actually off the island of Montreal. So he is potentially a Liberal leader that would actually resonate in sort of rural Quebec and outside the greater Montreal area, which is what the Liberals need, because that's where they were shut out practically in the last election.
And that is very interesting, right? Because, he's the former mayor of Montreal. Maybe his appeal is only confined to the island of Montreal. It turns out that it seems like he's got broad support, a whole bunch of demographics, right?
Absolutely.
So, let's dive into that. What else can you tell us about this? Maybe the broad kind of support that Denis Coderre sees?
Yeah. He is, though, more popular with voters 55 plus, but that was to be expected, and that is expected as well as what's left of the Liberal base tends to be somewhat older. However, he doesn't do that badly with younger generations. He's on par with the other potential candidates. And what he has that the others don't, that, for example, Marois Risky is more popular on the island of Montreal, and some of her support actually comes from Quebec Solidaire. But Denis Coderre is the only one that actually sees a dent in PQ support and a jump in Liberal support because he's able to communicate and to talk directly with Francophone rural Quebecers in a way that the other leadership candidates that we've tested anyway cannot do at this moment.
And when was it? A couple of weeks ago when the first time we started to really think about Denis Coderre running for the Liberal leadership, and he goes and buys his membership. I remember at the time, speaking of Marois Risky, there was some laughter. She had a good chuckle when she was asked about Coderre and his record in Montreal. When you look at the numbers and you look at how the Liberals would fare under Marois Risky or under Denis Coderre, who's laughing now?
Well, that's one. You could also look at it the other way, though, is the potential arrival of Denis Coderre is not having a massive impact on the data, but it's having an impact. And that's where, anyway, I think a lot of people will now start sort of calculating, he's the right candidate at the right time for the party. Is there anybody else who could sort of launch the party or relaunch the party outside of Denis Coderre? So now he's going to be part of every conversation, I believe, whereas maybe a couple of weeks ago, some people would have sort of discarded his potential leadership bid quite easily. I think these numbers show that you can't do that right now.
Let's talk a bit about the erosion of support for the current government, the CAQ. Obviously, they're now in second place and the PQ's in first. So let's talk about these scenarios here. Maybe it's a Denis Coderre-led Liberals and it's Paul St. Pierre Plamondon and the PQ. How are they doing at taking away votes from the CAQ?
Well, right now, the position for the Parti Québécois at 32% against 25% for the CAQ, that position is actually a bit more comfortable than what we think, because if you look among Francophone voters, which is really where the PQ can hope to actually gain any seats, they actually have a 10-point lead now on the CAQ. So it means that a lot of rural seats that were actually going to the CAQ would sort of topple over to the Parti Québécois at the moment. Whereas if you put Denis Coderre as the leader of the Liberals, the PQ loses a point, the CAQ loses 2 points, and the Liberals actually gain 6. So it is having an impact potentially on the race.
How do things shake out for Quebec Solidaire? Because, I think there have been moments where they really feel they're the real opposition here in Quebec, or they want to be at least the real opposition in Quebec. How are they faring? Because it seems like it's been difficult for them to gain traction. And what do the latest numbers say for them, let's say, on the island of Montreal, where they look to gain seats?
Well, they're tied for first place on the island of Montreal, which is sort of I would say the good news for Quebec Solidaire, which is they're holding on to their core voter on the island of Montreal. But they have not made any gains outside Montreal over the past few years, and it actually showed that their vote was actually had actually gone backwards in the last Quebec election in rural Quebec. So they're basically sort of stalling at the moment. They're not showing any signs, anyways, that they are growing their base anywhere in any way in the data. And for their own sake, if there is a leadership change at the Liberals, if the Liberals were to gain a few points compared to what they got in the last general election, it would mean getting that plurality of seat as an opposition party would be extremely difficult for Quebec Solidaire.
And just the point of the PQ support and how basically a quarter of PQ voters are not in favor of separation. What does that say to you?
Well, that was not something that was surprising to me anyway. What we're seeing is over the past 15 years, support for sovereignty has been stalling between 31 to 35. These are basically so 1 out of 3 Quebecers would say they would support sovereignty. Now, if you look at it, what made the CAQ popular is it gave the opportunity of slightly older, 45-plus voters outside Montreal to say, I can express a vote that is sort of nationalist in nature without sort of having the shackles of sovereignty. And it allowed the CAQ basically to pass the Parti Québécois in that left lane on the highway. And now some of the people that are going back to the PQ because they're dissatisfied with the current CAQ government basically are those nationalist voters who can still support the Parti Québécois, but not the option. So right now, 24% of PQ voters in our last poll said, I would vote no to sovereignty, and another 4% said, I don't know if I would support or oppose sovereignty at this moment. So if you are Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, it's basically, at the PQ, you can't ignore the issue of sovereignty. Very often, Quebec Solidaire sort of ignores it.
Yeah.
But at the Parti Québécois, you can't ignore it, but you sort of play it, it's sort of a dial. Right now, do we put the volume at 1 or 2 on sovereignty instead of 7 or 8, right?
Yeah, and especially turning it up to 10. Christian, we got to leave it there. Thanks so much.
All right, my pleasure.
Christian Bourque is Executive Vice President of Léger.